Heather, do you want to grant me permission to record?
Yes, I'm going to hit record right now.
Oh, I meant on my computer record.
Okay. All right, I think we are.
Okay.
Let me close that. And Xing out, we are good. Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
Great. I'm going to call this meeting of the Climate Action Plan Committee of the City of Salem to order. And present are Bennett, Hoy, and Phillips, and staff to be identified as they speak. We have only at this point written public comment. I don't believe there's any.
Yes, that's correct. We received 3 emails Friday afternoon by 5 p.m. and I forwarded those to the committee Friday afternoon. There was one additional comment from Phil Carver and 350 late last night that I believe was sent to the entire city council as well.
Right. Okay, very good. Need a motion for approval of minutes.
I move approval of the minutes as drafted.
Second.
Any objection? Okay. And state rulemaking, who's going to handle that one?
Okay, well, I can tee. Julie's here to join us this morning. She's got a number of slides. Thank you, Julie, for putting a lot of work into this presentation this morning. Just a quick before she dives in, I just want to remind folks that transportation is indeed the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in Salem. Julie is going to talk about the climate-friendly and equitable communities rulemaking that was actually initiated back in 2020 and is soon to be finalized. This rulemaking will have significant impacts to our transportation planning processes and associated infrastructure. Of course, the climate action plan was under development while this rule was underway, as well as the Our Salem. So the connection between the strategies, the rulemaking, Our Salem is quite strong. So Julie is going to help us to understand that this morning.
Very good. Julie?
Good morning. And I also want to point out that Eunice Kim is here as well, because as many of you know, transportation and land use go hand in hand. And so Eunice and I work closely together. So at the end of the presentation, we'll be happy to take questions. And so Eunice is here to support on that as well. So let me go ahead and try to share my screen. Okay.
Looks good.
Got it. Okay. So as Heather alluded to, the state rulemaking and the climate action plan and Our Salem and the Salem Transportation System Plan all are interrelated and work together. And because these things were a lot of these things were moving at the same time, we were aware of the connections. And so we've been building those in to the extent possible. I'm going to be focusing most of the presentation on the climate-friendly and equitable communities rulemaking. I will touch at the end on the commute trip reduction rulemaking that is also happening. So first, this is just a list of the transportation and land use related early implementation strategies from the Climate Action Plan. These were all listed for this agenda item. I'm not going to be talking individually about each one of these, but there are 10 of them in case you're wondering. So 3 of these are either completed or near completion, the ones that are checked off. The 6 strategies in red are related to the climate-friendly and equitable communities rules. And then the one listed in blue, which is TL21, relates to the commute trip reduction rulemaking. The climate-friendly and equitable communities rulemaking focuses on land use and transportation. These rules are being developed by the Department of Land Conservation and Development. They were initiated in response to Governor Brown's executive order that directed state agencies to take actions to reduce and regulate greenhouse gas emissions. I served on the Rulemaking Advisory Committee, and so I've been immersed in this process over the last 20 months. The rules are still being finalized with the expectation that they will be adopted later this month. Both the Department of Land Conservation and Development and the Oregon Department of Transportation are already gearing up to develop guidance for how to implement these rules over the next few years. So the rules apply in Oregon's 8 metropolitan areas shown on this slide. One of the primary objectives of these rules is to meet Oregon's pollution reduction targets for transportation, specifically emissions from light vehicles, which are small cars and small trucks. So I just want to distinguish this 30% reduction that's required for the Salem-Keizer area. That's the state requirement. On the city climate action plan, we have a adopted goal to be carbon neutral by 2050. That applies to all sectors, not just vehicle transportation. So it's possible that we as a city may decide to go beyond the 30% reduction in light vehicles, but the state requirement is to meet that 30% by 2050. So climate-friendly and equitable communities rules, also referred to as CFEC. I'm trying my best not to use acronyms, but a lot of these are really big mouthfuls. Includes both land use and transportation components. The Climate Action Plan has strategies that relate to both, to similar strategies that relate to land use and transportation objectives. The land use and transportation components of the climate-friendly rules align closely with the objectives of the Our Salem project. We expect to be able to build on the results of that planning effort. So I'm going to talk briefly about each of these different elements. My mouse is not being very responsive here. Okay, there we go. One of the first tasks required by the rules is to study and establish climate-friendly areas. These areas have to accommodate at least 30% of all needed housing in the city. This could include areas such as downtown or neighborhood centers. We anticipate starting this analysis using land use patterns proposed in the Our Salem project. Parking management is another category in the rules. These rules align with the Climate Action Plan strategy TL40 and build on actions that the city has actually already adopted. For example, the city recently eliminated parking requirements for new multifamily development near transit corridors. The state rules will require that the city either eliminate all minimum off-street parking requirements, so the box shown in blue, or pursue other methods to manage parking that supports the objectives of the rules. Under the climate-friendly and equitable communities rules, electric vehicle charging infrastructure for new multifamily and mixed-use development will need to be double what was required under House Bill 2180. On the transportation side, the rules require that we develop a regional plan for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. This will establish the performance measures that the city will be required to monitor and report on to the state on a regular basis. This slide lists the key levers that will be analyzed in preparing that regional plan. This is just an example to show how each region around the state could decide to take different approaches to achieve the emission reduction targets. The rules additionally require planning for higher quality infrastructure for people walking, bicycling, and using transit. This will translate to plans for more protected bike facilities beyond the bike lanes that were required by previous rules. The ultimate list of projects included in the TSP, Transportation System Plan, must work together to meet the city's climate goals. The rules also require an additional level of review and public engagement for any projects that add significant capacity for motor vehicles. We do not actually have many such projects within our currently adopted transportation plan. However, one example is the plan to eventually widen Kubler Boulevard east of I-5 to serve employment development at the Mill Creek Corporate Center. An additional level of analysis will be required for this project to remain in the Salem Transportation System Plan. The rule also requires that cities use at least 2 standards when reviewing land use decisions. These could include safety, efficiency, mobility, accessibility, among others. Guidance is still needed on how to consistently measure and apply these standards. Now that the rules are close to being adopted, the state is gearing up to develop guidance for implementation. The guidance will establish best practices and inform how to comply with the rules. So I'm going to try an analogy here, see if it works. So I was talking last week to the transportation planning manager with ODOT, and the way he described it is that the rulemaking was really building the swimming pool. So the swimming pool is almost built. The guidance is the water inside the swimming pool. And so you need the water to be there before you really dive in. So this is a really important step. So switching gears to the other rulemaking, the commute options rulemaking is not as far along and has a much more limited scope. The current commute options rule only applies in the Portland metropolitan area. This rulemaking is going to expand that state program statewide. I am also serving on this rulemaking advisory committee. We anticipate draft rules being available by the end of 2022 and that with adoption in 23. We expect that the rule will apply to the city of Salem as a large employer. Currently, the rule in Portland applies to employers who have 100 or more employees at one work site. And so if that model is expanded across the state, then we would definitely fall into that category. So I'm going to wrap up my presentation with a quick look at work that is currently underway and what is anticipated in the short term. So a key building block for all of this work is the adoption of the Salem policy framework and land use patterns. So hopefully that's going to be done relatively soon because we are counting on that. Also underway is the Chariot's long-range transit plan. I believe that Chariots will be invited to present at an upcoming meeting of this committee. I think maybe possibly next month. The first step in meeting the climate-friendly and equitable communities rules is to identify likely locations for climate-friendly areas. As I mentioned before, we expect those to align closely with the work done through Salem. The state is contracting with the Council of Governments to undertake this analysis in partnership with Salem, Kaiser, and Marion County. We anticipate bringing an IGA to council within the next few months to authorize our participation in this study. We will be switching to parking. We will be initiating discussions around parking policy requirements within the next several months. On the transportation system plan, we are currently collecting asset data to support the update of the transportation system plan, as well as supporting our overall city asset management program. We will be developing a required work program that will establish the timelines for the various overlapping elements of the TSP. And throughout this process, we will be coordinating with ODOT on guidance specific to TSP so that we understand what is needed. We will also be working with the ODOT Climate Office to initiate phase 1 of the TSP, which will lead to that regional framework and performance measure requirements. The expanded EV charging requirements, which is one of the more discrete items in this list, will be coming to council within the next year. And finally, the city will need to develop a commute options plan for city employees. However, the date for this work is not established. While I expect the final rules to be adopted in 2023, they have alluded to phased implementation of some sort. So with that, I'm going to stop my share and entertain any questions that you may have, or with Eunice's help. Yes, Chris.
Counselor Hoy?
Thank you. A couple of questions. One is just kind of a process question on the transportation system plan development. What's that process going to look like? Is it going to mirror the Salem process, or will there be something different? That's my first question.
Honestly, I can tell you that I don't know for sure at this point, largely because these rules are so integral to what we need to do for it, that it's a work in progress. Like I mentioned before, that first stage is needing to do this regional framework and then making sure we follow that guidance. So unfortunately, I don't have the detailed answer at this point.
Okay, will you keep us posted on that? And so we can be aware of and involved in that conversation. That'd be great. The other question I have is about the commute reduction. And that's as it relates to the state as an employer. Will they be developing their own rules for their own employees, or will they be subject to the jurisdiction in which they work? So in other words, will they be subject to our rules?
They would be developing their own program. So the rules apply. The rules as they're anticipated would apply to us just as an employer, not as a regulator. So we would not be telling the state that they have to do something. It's the state Department of Environmental Quality telling everybody, including the state, that they have to do something. The current rules require a certain amount of surveying of employees. They also require, in Portland, they require a 10% reduction of people using drive-alone transportation. And so I'm assuming these will be mirrored after that, possibly even stronger than that. I also wanted to mention that the Chariot's Transportation Options Group is being keyed into this very closely, because they are going to be working with employers, not only us, but presumably the state and other large employers in Salem, to develop plans once we know what the rules are.
Thank you.
Any other question? How will this, Julie, how will this be integrated into the city's council's policy development? It's coming up. Will this be coming to the council, or pieces of this that need policy working by the council?
My assumption is that this is going to be rolled into the work on the transportation system plan and the parking. All of these things really do align. And so I think it is important that we keep that communication open with council as you set your policy agenda, that, in addition to doing the council's direct policy, we have to be meeting these state requirements at the same time.
And so that'll be introduced into the policy development this year. That'll be coming to the council. Recommendations on how to integrate this.
I can definitely
years here, and
yeah, we are. Yeah. And I can definitely talk to the city manager's office about how to best fold that in.
Great. Okay. Anything else? Okay.
I just have one other one.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Timeline on initiating the transportation system plan development locally.
So the initiation, that first step I mentioned is needing to do that regional plan, which is going to involve, us as well. So that work program is required to be done and submitted to the state by the end of June. So in about a little less than a year. We're hoping to be done with that sooner. And then that will establish the sort of sub timeframes for other elements of the planning process, including, go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt, I didn't mean to, but so are we a year away from initiating the TSP update then? Is that what I'm hearing?
I guess it depends on how you define initiating. I feel like we are already initiating it in the sense that we are collecting data. We are, working actively on this work program for the regional framework, which is the first phase of the TSP. So,
Sure.
So in terms of like a public facing initiation, it will probably be through that regional framework, establishing that regional framework, which I say we were probably, hopefully less than a year to that, but a little bit uncertain right now.
Thank you.
Julie, how long did it take to do the last TSP? What's the time, was the timeline like? This looks like a more complex situation, but.
Yeah, I mean, the original requirements for transportation system plans came on in the early to mid 90s. And I was not working at the city then. I think Peter might have been or came in during that time. But I know that the final adoption of the transportation system plan was maybe 1998. And then I think we were finally acknowledged for all elements of it in 2009 as part of the periodic review. So that was, the hard work of developing the initial TSP was probably 95 to 98. Peter, does that sound about right?
Mark Bechtel and I were hired to work on the TSP back in the mid 90s. So, and then it's gone through a series of, we developed the TSP in such a way that it could be amended and it could be easily amended. And we've gone through several amendment cycles. I think this cycle will be much more significant because one, it's going to support our Salem. So assuming the council adopts that tonight, then that's one big building block to amending the TSP. The other thing that is just a little strange, and Julie and I were talking about it, is so we were headed down a path of, hey, our Salem's adopted, we'll jump right in, and we actually have money budgeted to make the TSP amendments. But now there's this new rule that isn't quite ready for prime time yet. And so do we wait? Do we proceed with just amending the TSP based on our Salem, or do we wait for this rule, chancing that we might have to then re-amend or change horses in the middle of an amendment cycle? So that's, we really, I think at this point, I think what we're recommending is we should wait for the rule and just see where that leads us. We think a lot of it is consistent with what the city's done or will soon do with our Salem, and then we can amend. So that's really what's going to delay the process, and that's why you hear Julie hedging a little bit, is because we just really don't know at this point when that rulemaking is going to be done.
The reason I'm asking, Peter, is this is really kind of the guts of the climate action plan. This is where a lot of the issues start getting resolved, or through these transportation through the transportation policy development and goals and meeting those. It's kind of what's public expectations will be set by this. And I think it's important that people understand what the timeline, not that you have it today, but that we develop as soon as we can, what the timeline looks like. Because as we talked about the TSP as it was developed before, we're talking, sort of decades there, that or a decade and a half or so. Are we looking at the same kind of process, or will it be different? How will this fit into the 2020 2050 or 2035 objectives in climate action? How does that all fit together? What can people expect?
Yeah, I'll kick off a response, and then Julie, I'm sure will jump in. So we do not expect that the TSP amendments will take 10 years to complete.
Okay.
Our sense is it would take a year-ish, maybe 2 years.
Higher. It still sounds higher. It sounds like about 5
2.5 years, and that's all. Then Julie's going to be in trouble. So,
But it has, as you listen to it, it sounds like a multi-year project to get to a final. Will there be then targets along the way that'll be met that can be translated into the climate action plan and its objectives and sort of where we are? So there'll be markers along the way, or how will this kind of integrate itself into this plan?
go ahead.
See. Yeah, I mean, you have very good questions. I have the same questions myself. I anticipate that, we'll be able to chunk it out a little bit so that, maybe we can focus first on the active transportation network. We did an update to our Bike and Walk Salem plan about 10 years ago, which I know some people may say that's a long time ago, but really in planning world, it's not. But we could do a revisit of that. And once we know what the climate friendly areas are, because one of the requirements for climate friendly areas is that we provide a higher level of protection for the bike, ped, and transit services to and through those areas. So we want to make sure that we know those areas, then we can probably chunk out the active transportation component. And then part of the issue is that the state is requiring that instead of, right now we have project lists, you might be familiar, we have project lists for bicycle projects, pedestrian projects, transit projects, street projects. With these new rules, the state is requiring a singular project list. And so you have to take all of those projects, push them all together and then prioritize them amongst, including amongst each other. So I'm still trying to I think we can do some of that initial work on the active transportation, trying to figure out how we get it into adoption when we won't have all those other pieces yet necessarily. So, so it is a lot of spaghetti, and we're just trying to figure out, and we definitely recognize the importance and the drive to get these climate action plan things moving. As I mentioned on the land use, like on the parking side, we are already trying to move towards a lot of these objectives. It's just that these rules are going to make us move a little further, and that's perfectly fine. So some of that stuff will be coming sooner. The parking requirements, for example, if we have not decided, based on the current version of the rules, if we have not decided what we want to do as a city by December 31st of this year, the state's going to automatically say that we're not applying certain parking minimums. So that conversation will be happening sooner.
Okay.
Anyway, I could go on for hours, and so
it's a complicated problem. I just think that one of the expectations in the community is a picture of this, what a set of accomplished goals look like leading toward the final goal and what the timeline will be on that. As you listen to folks talk about it, it's sort of well, how come you're not moving along here? And I know you'll have a project description, probably like our Salem had, is here's the points at which we'll be making decisions or expecting you to make decisions and where we'll be on that timeline continuum. I just think there is a real potential for frustration. And that somehow it'll be assigned along the way, and making sure that it's clear what's required to get to each of these goal lines, I think will be real important.
Yeah.
This is really complicated and gets more complicated as the state dips in. So
yeah, if I may, Mayor, I think there's a gigantic step tonight or 2 weeks from tonight in the council adopted our Salem, because our Salem is already very much implements a lot of what the state is requiring. So I think that's already a pretty big step, and the TSP amendments is really just a support document to that. Beyond adopting changes to the TSP, which are really planning documents that guide us really into the future, we are doing a lot, and Heather is continuing to share a lot of the action steps in the climate action plan that we're doing regardless of, updating planning documents is one of the steps, but beyond updating planning documents, there's like, I guess I'll call them real for lack of a better word, real actions that we are undertaking to implement the climate action plan. Working to install electric vehicle charging stations, looking to electrify the city fleet, planting more trees, and there's a whole host of things that we are doing, every day beyond these planning documents. So there shouldn't be, planning is complicated, but there shouldn't be a frustration that planning documents are going to take a while because we're doing or trying to do all these other things that are true implementations of actions.
Okay. Good, thank you. Okay, anyone else? Hey, Heather, what's next?
Yeah, I'll just confirm. Thank you very much, Julie, and everybody else who spoke this morning. I'll just confirm. So we had sent out 10 different sheets that tied to Julie's discussion this morning, and they're not meant to be or intended to be exhaustive in any way, but provide a snapshot, if you will, of what's involved and where we're at. So just confirming that there were no questions from this group. Hopefully the information is easy to follow and helpful before we move to the next. We've got our subject matter experts, so.
I thought it was really good. I thought it was very helpful to see this in writing and kind of where we are and where we're headed and how this comes together. And,
great.
Quite helpful.
Very good. Okay, well, thank you. I think we're moving on to our next agenda item here. We had included TL15 as an item supporting super transit network. And quite honestly, that was one of the sheets that we had provided a ton of information. We had done some information, some research, reached out and spoke with ODOT. So there's a lot of information on that sheet. I wasn't planning today that we would have a whole lot of discussion unless there's questions about that. What the information shows is that ODOT has been working for years and continues to work on efforts that will increase the number of trains up and down the valley between Portland and Salem. There are restrictions on the timing of those trains. So even if we get to up to 6 at some point in the future, additional trains, they might not necessarily be timed such that they meet the needs of commuters. And my understanding now is that that's based on authorization provided to the railroads. Amtrak does not have that authority necessarily. That said, there's efforts underway to increase the number of trains. There's also been a number of efforts to expand the West Side Express, TriMet's express train up north, which currently terminates in Wilsonville. Apparently over a number of years, there was the last bill, I think, was in 2019 that was introduced to try to push that effort forward, which would be incredible. Obviously, there's a number of obstacles, the cost for that being one, the number of agencies that would be involved in the agreements necessary. So there's a number of things potentially kind of slowing that effort down, but we might see that come back before us yet again. So really at this point, in terms of actions for the city forward, we're going to stay, abreast of any changes or any bills that come forth. I know that we've submitted letters of support for railroad improvement projects in the past, and I think it would continue to be a benefit for us to do that, not only for projects in Salem, but it sounds like up and down the valley, anything that's going to improve efficiency and safety of our rail lines. So that's one thing that we can look to. Additionally, this next year with the legislative committee, we can watch and see if there's any new bills that are presented and or champion our own bill if we so choose to do so to kind of help push. I think it would be that West Side Express primarily that would be the biggest impact. So that was the summary that we had today. Were there any questions on the information that was presented in the summary sheet?
No?
Nothing. Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay.
Good job.
All right. So we're just moving down the list. We had included that, at our last meeting, we had talked about whether or not to continue on this early implementation list, this list of 55. And we certainly don't have to continue moving forward, but this was my understanding, at least for now, that we were going to keep moving forward. So that's indeed what we did for this agenda. We tried to grab as many of the transportation ones, and I think we hit pretty much all of the transportation ones in the state rulemaking. So that was our discussion. Going down the list from the top, we just discussed TL15. We're going to stay abreast of any changes on that. There was a number of comments presented before our last meeting, and I do want to confirm that, those comments had included the transportation strategies. They had also included an energy one for a green power rate. As I did look into this during the last month, I was able to learn that that's indeed the same. And I've called that out on a sheet for you all, our latest implementation list, that is the same as EN30, which is on the front page of our early implementation. So I did start to dive into that particular strategy. EN30 is collaboration with PGE on a community-wide clean energy program. So again, it was confirmed that that is indeed the same as a green power rate listed in EN9, which is in the larger plan. So it did meet, in fact, with PGE during the last month, and we did chat about that a little bit. This is part of my updates. So this community-wide clean energy program is actually quite a big deal. It's something that I'm hoping PGE, and I have indeed invited PGE to attend one of our meetings. I'm not yet certain that they can attend in August. That was an option provided. We're going to be meeting August 1st again already. But August 1st or September 12th, I believe, were the next two. So I'm trying to get somebody from PGE to come and speak to this. It's a program that they're working on. There's going to be months more of development for this. What it is, what they're looking at simply is an umbrella green tariff program that would apply to communities who choose to sign on. And so it's something that the first step for PGE, once they finalize, and they're hoping to finalize something by the end of this year, that would go to the Public Utilities Commission, a filing to the PUC for their approval and buy-off. Before then, it would reach out to the various communities that are interested. And there has been some jurisdictions from north of us that have expressed an interest, I think, so far already, and have been kind of sitting in a number of workshops. So it was exciting for me to hear this. It would be a big program, a big step. I will say that they are looking at equity as a big factor into whatever is developed. And so those that would not be able to sign on to this tariff program, there would be options for folks to opt out or to not be included as needed. So again, I'm hoping that PGE can come and fill in the gaps and answer any questions and give us an update on that. But that's one of our not only is it on the top of our list, but that's one of our high greenhouse gas emission reduction strategies. So again, we're working forward, trying to get staff here to chat about that a bit more. There's nothing final. We're hoping for some movement by the end of the year.
And resolution of that, did I understand it, will come through the PUC, or is that how that will be somehow resolved?
That is my understanding would be the first step, is whatever program, the outline for the program, the bones that they develop needs to first be approved by the PUC, right? And then once that process is completed, which I think could take some time, then it would be doled out to the communities that are interested, and there would be individual agreements of sorts as they begin to work with folks. And then it would be up to elected officials then to present that and discuss and approve or not.
You know, another issue area that we've heard about that's been coming up has really been solid waste, just take it as a broad category, and how it's billed and how it's structured. Should we be have you looked at having us hear from the solid waste industry about some of these concepts, or should we just wait on that and let those get more ripe?
Well, if others want to jump in, I'll say that's not something that I've reached out to just yet. If that's something we're
Okay.
interested in, I can switch gears and make that happen. I'm happy to. We do have a couple of materials and waste on this early list, or we can start branching out and looking to the larger plan. I'm happy to go in whatever direction, but I've not yet done that.
Okay. Chris, what do you think? We hear about this various ideas.
Yeah, I definitely think it's something that we need to look at. I don't recall exactly how it's called out in the plan. I'd have to review that, but I think we definitely need to be having that conversation in this committee.
Yeah, I think there's been, at least over the past 6 months, there've been some early interest in various aspects of it. You know, what are you doing about plastics? Can you have a smaller rather than a larger bucket? A lot of different ways of approaching. I forget the pay to throw, or I can't remember the
Pay as you throw.
pay as you throw. Yeah. Different kinds of ideas. And I just wonder, I noticed Phil mentioned it in his letter, and I just wonder if that's one we should.
It might be helpful to have an update from the county in terms of all
Yeah.
of the recycling efforts, the community education, and their implementation of some of the new statutes. I think that might be something that would be helpful so we get a current status, because I'm not really clear
That's
where
been a-
they are at this point, and they sort of drive part of that. But then we could also decide that we want to take the lead if they're not, where we need them to be.
Could you take a look at that, Heather? I think
Yes.
bringing in the county makes really good sense for setting the baseline. Where are we and where do they see it going? They tend to be more in the driver's seat than we are in terms of policy. So it'd be interesting, I think. Yeah, Trevor.
Mayor, I would also just like to mention that for our policy agenda work session coming up in July, that Josh and the finance group is going to be bringing forward an update as well, and so talking about next steps.
Right.
So this all ties in together very well.
Okay. Trevor, did you?
Yeah, it was a previous, thank you, Mayor. It was a thumbs up. Like, I agree that we should
Oh,
look at this.
I
this
can't see
solid-
here.
Totally fine, totally fine. I think that what will also be helpful is to, as much as we can, get kind of a sense of perspective as much as is possible from the climate audit, like how much of a segment is solid waste management in comparison to the other sections. Because as has been stated previously, transportation was over 50% by that, by sector audit. So, I think the community is very interested in how we do solid waste. I don't think that a lot of the community members who are advocating for pay as you throw agree that we have, in a sense, already, to a certain extent, limited though it may be, pay as you throw. They may be frustrated that there's not a lot of levers we can pull. So I think Chris's suggestion of understanding what the rules and constraints are now is very helpful. And also just from my decision-making perspective, like how big of a chunk is this? Is there a lot of there that it is worth our time? Because we're trying to triage this out. So, just that constant reminder of like, is there a big bang for the buck?
Yeah, and is there an opportunity for us to have impact? I mean, clearly in transportation, we can have some, but there is this overriding state set of rules and changes going on. I mean, it really is, where can we, it'll be not only the size of the bang, but can you actually make a bang? I think that's a really good point.
Well, thank you very much for bringing that up. I'm very happy to shift gears and start to look at that. As we start to look at the coming agendas, we've kept so far on this early implementation list, but we can stray at whenever we feel is needed. It started to make sense to start grouping the strategies as we did today a bit. Transportation, again, I was hoping that perhaps we could focus on energy soon, if not next month and the following. I'm going to be reaching out to Chariots shortly as well, to get their input. So I can also start the conversation with the county about the waste as well. But I've been looking at grouping, I've been looking at this early list, and I'm trying to be mindful, starting with the high greenhouse gas reduction strategies that we can dive into quickly. So that's kind of been the mindset thus far.
Great. Well, it really makes sense the way you're structuring or bringing this to us. I think the only other factor that I think will be interesting as time passes is where can not just have large impact, but any impact. I mean, where can the city actually have impact in some of these areas, like planting trees? While probably not the gigantic solution, it is something we can actually do and do very well. Or, other assets like parking. We actually have quite a bit of control over our own parking, and have tried going down that road a few times, and it feels regularly like it always feels like it's time to go back and look at paid parking. But that's the kind of thing I think might be, ways of looking at this. Yeah, Trevor.
Yeah, specifically when it comes to the parking, I think it's been pretty clear from the presentation from Julie and others today that there's actually a timeline that it has to be, or should, if we're going to make an effort to make changes, there's the deadline is December of this year. So I guess my question is just how do we, look at those different options so that we can pick the Salem right size solution within the deadline? I mean, is that just going to naturally happen based on the state's timeline, or, how do we expect that decision-making process to reach its conclusion in time?
I'll just chime in on the,
Sure.
on the parking thing. I think planning will be probably leading the discussion, but I know that I mentioned that deadline. It's really that there are just a couple of specific things that we would need to, that the state would essentially put on us if we're not done by the end of December. It doesn't mean that we have to be totally done with all of the decision making, because if we choose to remove all parking minimums, okay, throughout the city, no matter what use, that's a relatively simple action. However, I think that in order to make that decision, council is probably going to want to understand what the alternative approach is. And the alternative approach is quite complicated. And so I think I said in the timeline that probably in the next year, we'll be trying to land on that. However, the December is not like, if we're not there by the end of December, there's going to be some changes that will go in place automatically, and then we can continue that conversation. Eunice, do you want to correct me?
No, I think that's right. We will bring something forward that kind of poses the options and starts that bigger conversation of no parking requirements, minimums, and all the rest, because we do need to get direction, because all the rest also is like multi-part. So if it's not one, then we really need to start diving into the rest. We'll bring that to you.
And just a follow-up, thank you so much for that. If we, end up going with the simpler option, are we stuck? Could we move to, the more complicated option if we see a better way moving forward after December, I guess?
Yes, we could. And we could also do no parking minimums plus, right? It's not, we could do that as well.
Thank you for those clarifying comments.
Okay, well, I did have a couple other updates for the committee before we sign off today. I wanted to share that that staff did submit last Friday, actually, a grant application for the Oregon Department of Energy's Community Renewable Energy Grant Program that they just released this year. So we actually submitted 2 different applications for that. One was a construction project of a new community microgrid. It's called, that would be connected and adjacent to the new Public Works building, and able to connect to our existing solar that will be installed on the building, and can isolate an area there around the building, the apartments and housing in that area in the event of an emergency shutoff or emergency issue. So that will be a big project. If we hear back, that will be the first. If we hear approval, that would be the first in Oregon for that type of community microgrid project. It would supply emergency backup power not only to our public works building and the critical services that will provide, but also to those houses. I think there's about 36 homes in the area and 95 or 96 apartments there right across the street that would also benefit from that project. So really exciting, and they put a lot of work into that. The second grant that was submitted was for a planning grant under the same program. That application looked to increase the number of electric charging stations. We already have a couple at the library, so this would look to add to the library, add new stations to City Hall, and to add new stations to our fleet services building as well in Salem. So we should hear back on both some kind of status on whether or not those are moving to the next step soon, I hope. Final decision is not expected until September. So really glad to get those submitted. And those do also touch on other strategies in our plan that aren't included in this early implementation list. So progress there as well. And one other thing that I did learn about the city's energy usage, which I wanted to share today, is that the city has been indeed signed on to 2 different programs with PGE supporting renewable energy now for several years. Initially, it was the Clean Wind Green Future Enterprise Program that the city participated in for years. In 2019, and folks here may be aware, this is something new to me, the city actually also signed on to the Green Future Impact Program with PGE. And so with those 2 programs combined, roughly, I believe it's 80% of our usage and our monthly bill is now supporting renewable energy credits or renewable energy. So PGE actually has public PR kits that they can share, and I think they have provided. Again, this was news to me, but it's one of these things. It's one of those many activities that Peter mentioned. You know, there's a lot of work already underway. We just need to do a better job promoting it and sharing it with the community. So,
well, you'd have to follow the city council over time as they do happen over time, and decisions are being made on a regular basis and have been. So to the extent that those can be cataloged, that'd be very helpful, I think, for the public and the council to have a good understanding of what's been done over the years to get to this point.
Yes, I agree. I actually found the staff report from 2019 describing that program very helpful. So yes.
Great.
And with that, that was our agenda for today. Again, I'm looking at those high greenhouse gas emissions energy. I'll be looking at the county, and I'm going to be reaching out to Chariots as well to start lining up the next couple of agendas and meetings forward.
Great. I had a chance to talk with Alan Pollock this week, and
Yeah.
In some detail about where they're heading, and it was really interesting. It's like everything else, there's a lot of money in the way that has to be raised or spent, and I think that's going to be the real challenge. But the ideas seem to be really there. The idea of the use of transit centers, and particularly the one in South Salem, they're looking at is really exciting stuff, I think.
Yeah.
For commuters and people who would prefer using alternative modes. So it's really pretty good stuff. Are there any topics you'd like to have Heather look at for future meetings? Are there things that we're not covering in these meetings that you'd like to have us get to, or actions you want us to take to recommend to Council Chris?
I think just continuing down our list for now is the
Great.
best strategy, personally.
Okay,
Very
great.
good.
Very
Thank-
good.
Yeah.
Cover anything? Okay.
I'm good.
Very good. Well, thank you very much. If there's no further business, we'll go ahead and adjourn. Okay, we're adjourned.
Okay, thank you all.
I think that went well.
Oh, Judy's still there. Thank you, Judy.
Leaving
look-
now.